comeback. No comeback. Thank you.
For many protesters, this is the first time they dare to speak up. But it's certainly not the last one, for the sake of future generations.
Well, later on Saturday, the UN Security Council is set to vote on a resolution drafted on Friday against Libya. It comes after the Secretary-General called for action. Well, Scott Heidler is at the UN headquarters in New York.
The Libyan mission arriving to brief the UN Security Council Friday, calling for swift action to curb the violence in their country. An emotional plea from Libya's ambassador, the latest high-profile diplomat to abandon the Gaddafi government.
Please, United Nations, save Libya. No to bloodshed, no to killing of innocents. We want a decisive, a rapid and a courageous resolution from you.
And it looks like they will be getting something from the Security Council. A draft resolution put together by the UK and France is expected to pass on Saturday. The resolution calls for an arms embargo both into and out of Libya, plus a travel ban and asset freeze for Gaddafi and his inner circle. It also seeks to refer the situation in Libya to the International Criminal Court for crimes against humanity. Is it enough?
Mr. Secretary-General, you said that this is an urgent time. Loss of time is loss of life. And the draft resolution details embargoes, sanctions, freezing accounts. Is that enough to stop the violence now? As you said, it's an urgent time. Is that enough to stop it now? Should there be military intervention?
I have urged the Security Council to take a wide range of options. I understand that the Security Council is very seriously considering all possible options, but that is up to the member states of the Security Council to determine what course of action should be taken at this time.
In Washington, too, talk turned to accountability on Friday. For days, the U.S. had said its highest priority was ensuring the safety of its citizens in Libya. And no sooner had the U.S. chartered ferry from Tripoli docked in Malta with more than 150 Americans on board than the White House came out with its own action plan.
We have decided to move forward with unilateral sanctions, which we are in the process of finalizing. Coordinated sanctions with our European allies and multilateral efforts to hold the Libyan government accountable through the United Nations.
For its part, the United Nations won't say what additional options are on the table for dealing with Gaddafi.
I think it's too early to say. We are basically focusing on this resolution right now, and we will continue to follow the situation.
The French delegation was quick to point out that it's not just Western nations who are behind taking action against Libya. The resolution has broad appeal. That's something that's uncommon at the Security Council. Scott Heidler, AlJazeera, the United Nations.
Well, details are now emerging of the sanctions that have been imposed against Gaddafi's regime by the Obama administration. It plans to freeze assets held inside the U.S. by the Libyan leader and his 4 children. All American banks have been put on notice for a sudden movement of funds from Libya, and all U.S. military assistance to the North African country will now be cut off. Well, joining me now in our Doha studio is Yusuf Bouandel. He's a professor of international relations at Qatar University. Thanks for coming in.
Morning.
About these unilateral sanctions, will they mean much to Gaddafi?
Well, they will start to hit even harder because over the last week or so there has been talks, signals and so on and so forth, but this is the first decisive action that the US has taken, obviously, after its nationals have fled the country.
More turmoil in the capital on Friday. Who's backing Gaddafi now? Who is he threatening to arm when he says we'll open up and arm people?
Obviously, there are certain people who are still loyal to Gaddafi. That some people in the military under the command of his sons, Khamis and Mu'tasim. Also, some revolutionary councils that are still loyal to Gaddafi, and that's what he's saying he will arm. There are others that allegedly brought from African countries, the so-called mercenaries, and he's saying that he will open up the arms depots throughout Tripoli in order to save his regime.
We're hearing reports that there was more shooting of protesters after Friday prayers yesterday. Has that damaged the will of the protesting movement?
I don't think it will, simply because the protesters are gaining momentum by the day, and Gaddafi is a desperate man at the moment, and he will use desperate measures to stop the protesters coming in. Libya will be the final battle before the end of his regime. So Tripoli will be the end battle.
His final stand.
Yep.
Well, the Security Council is meeting on Saturday. The draft resolution talks about sanctions. Would even multilateral sanctions be enough to protect the protesters?
Well, the Security Council is looking at the developments in Libya itself. They made a very strong signal before. The United States moved for unilateral sanctions, but the more sanctions, the more countries join these sanctions, the harder it's going to hit Gaddafi, and the supporters will take stock of what is happening.
The Secretary General, though, is talking about troops going in hospitals, hunting down protesters or wounded opponents and shooting and killing them again. Can anything short of sending troops stop things like that, though?
Well, the Libyans inside are saying that we don't want them. I heard a report yesterday from the Eastern Legion saying that we don't want people to intervene militarily in Libya. But the Security Council, according to the Secretary General, has made it clear that everything is possible. They're looking at all options. And obviously, the opposition to Gaddafi is getting stronger, and I think that they will be able to
deal with it themselves.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks so much, Yusuf, for your thoughts on that. Well, people have been fleeing Libya, telling of the carnage as they go out, the carnage that they're leaving behind. Some have found sanctuary on the nearby island of Malta. A U.S. chartered ferry carrying around 300, mostly U.S. citizens, finally arrived in Valletta. Rough weather delayed the sailing from Tripoli for 2 days. Cal Perry now with more from Malta.
Now, over 300 civilians arriving here in the port of Malta, carrying with them stories from Tripoli. Most people said the fighting was worse at night. Everyone agreeing that the humanitarian situation is growing worse by the day, people having trouble finding basic things like food and water. Almost everybody who arrived here said that the boat trip was incredibly difficult. 2 days in port, followed by a 9-hour journey through very rough waters.
I think it was rough because we stayed docked idle for about 2 nights, and then today, this is a trip that's supposed to take 6 or 7 hours. Took us about 9.5 hours. High seas, the situation was pretty bad. High waves and what have you.
Also perhaps a watershed moment for many governments around the world who were afraid to threaten Colonel Gaddafi's regime while their civilians were still on the ground. Now, of course, the conversation can turn to potential military intervention.
Well, still to come on Al Jazeera, we'll see the damage being caused by aftershocks still shaking the shattered city of Christchurch. And fans in Pakistan gear up for the Cricket World Cup the best way they know how.
Welcome back to your weather forecast. We are first going to start with Japan. They have had a nice little break over the last couple of days, but more rain is going to be coming into their forecast. As you can see here, this right here is an area of high pressure. That means all the clouds have dissipated, but it's been bringing a little bit of cooler air into the forecast. Now over towards the west, some snow, some rain, and normally this would be bad news, but for China, this is actually very good news over the next couple of days. They have seen some incredible drought conditions over the last weeks and months. So we're going to be getting rain, we're going to be getting snow. The snow will actually stay until the spring melt and help those farmers in need. A little bit further down towards the south, we are going to be seeing some cloudy conditions. This really hasn't changed much over the last couple of days, and it's not going to change much as we go into Sunday. You notice very cloudy conditions all the way to Taipei. Temperatures will stay in the mid to low 20s. As you can see, down towards Manila, though, it's going to be about 29 to about 30 degrees. The heat index will be a little bit higher than that. But down towards Australia, that's where the big news is right now. We're looking at some very wet conditions up here towards the north. Adelaide, 38 degrees. As we go into the next day, 40 degrees. That means all along the Great Bight right here, we're looking at extreme fire dangers for them.
The Golan Heights, one of the spoils of the 1967 war, home to 20,000 Israelis and source of 1/3 of all Israel's water. But what of the Syrians left behind? With families torn apart and all borders closed, they come to talk to their loved ones across the Shouting Valley. Across the Shouting Valley on Al Jazeera.
Welcome back. Let's bring you the very latest from Libya now, where protests against Muammar al-Gaddafi are entering their 9th day. Protesters have been gaining more support from inside and outside the country. Well, these pictures appear to show soldiers switching sides in Zawiya. Well, they're welcomed by jubilant protesters. But others have been fired upon. These pictures are from Tripoli, where another crackdown began after Friday prayers. Elsewhere in the capital, the Libyan leader addressed supporters in person, promising to fight to cling to power. But more of his men are turning their backs on him and siding with the protesters, including diplomats to France and the UN, including its Human Rights Council. Nick Spicer reports.
It was a rare special session at the United Nations Human Rights Council, an emergency meeting, and the first ever devoted to a country that is still a member. Libya, absent at the start of the day.
Libya holds one of the 47 seats on the Human Rights Council. In its application for membership, it said it was fully committed to the protection of human rights, which includes the right to direct participation in public life.
A broken pledge. The other country's criticism was relentless.
I think it tells us what we all see on our television screens, that there is a sense of revulsion and outrage as to what's been going on in Libya over the last few days.
The Libyan authorities are violating the universal rights of their own people, and the international community needs to stand up and speak with one voice in solidarity with the people of Libya.
It was all beginning to feel a bit routine when came the surprise. A Libyan diplomat turned up to say he and his colleagues working in Geneva now no longer served the Libyan government, but the Libyan people. The Libyan diplomats here were not alone. Ambassadors to France and UNESCO also resigned on Friday. The United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, present at Friday's session, said it was an historic moment.
It was very, very moving to hear the speech of the Deputy Ambassador of Libya here in Geneva, who first recited verses from the Quran, all of which supports the position that what the ruler of Libya is doing is totally unacceptable in accordance with